The rain hammered against the reinforced glass windows of the Pentagon's underground briefing room as Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Steele slammed his fist on the mahogany table. Absolutely not. I don't care what her file says. The Ghost Protocol is not a playground for diversity quotas. Across from him, General Patricia Hayes maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened imperceptibly. With all due respect, Colonel, Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell's qualifications speak for themselves. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Navy Cross recipient. Expert in asymmetric warfare. And a woman? Steele interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. The Ghost Protocol has operated for 15 years without a single female participant. There's a reason for that. General, this isn't about checking boxes. It's about maintaining the integrity of the most elite tactical training program in existence. Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the corner, her hazel eyes fixed on a point above Steele's head. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the unsurvivable. A jagged scar ran from her left eyebrow to her cheekbone, a souvenir from Kandahar that she wore without shame. Her blonde hair, regulation length, was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Perhaps, General Hayes said carefully, we should let Master Sergeant Mitchell speak for herself. Steele's cold blue eyes shifted to Sarah. Fine. Tell me, Sergeant, what makes you think you can handle the Ghost Protocol? Do you even know what it entails? Sarah's voice was steady, measured. I know it's a classified program designed to test unconventional warfare tactics in extreme conditions. I know the dropout rate is 97%, and I know that no one has completed the full 72-hour final exercise in the last 3 years. Precisely. Steele leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Men with twice your muscle mass have broken down crying in the first 12 hours. Navy SEALs have quit. Delta Force operators have been carried out on stretchers. What makes you think? Because I've already survived worse. Sarah interrupted, her composure cracking just enough to let Steele show through. Sir. The room fell silent. Rain continued its assault on the windows. Steele's face darkened. Worse? You think your little sandbox adventures compare to what we do here? Sarah's hands, clasped behind her back, tightened imperceptibly. Images flashed through her mind, the ambush that killed half her squad. The 48 hours she spent evading capture with a bullet lodged in her shoulder. The interrogation techniques she endured before her rescue, but she said nothing. General Hayes cleared her throat. Colonel Steele, the decision has already been made. Master Sergeant Mitchell will report to Site 7 at 0600 tomorrow. Steele stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Mark my words, General, this will end badly, and when it does, when she gets someone killed because she can't keep up, that blood will be on your hands. He turned to Sarah, his eyes narrowing. You want to play with the big boys, Mitchell, Fina, but don't expect any special treatment. The Ghost Protocol doesn't care about your feelings. As he stormed out, Sarah allowed herself a small exhale. General Hayes gathered her papers, offering Sarah a tight smile. He's not entirely wrong. You know, the Ghost Protocol is different. It's designed to break people. I understand. Ma'am? Do you? Hayes studied her carefully. Sarah, I fought to get you this opportunity because I believe the program needs to evolve. But make no mistake, you'll be alone in there. Steele has influence, and he'll make sure of it. Sarah nodded. I've been alone before. 24 hours earlier, Sarah had been running her usual 5-mile circuit around Fort Bragg when the encrypted message arrived. Report to Pentagon. Immediate. Classified. She'd known this day might come her. Application to the Ghost Protocol had been submitted 6 months ago, only to be rejected without explanation. But someone, somewhere, had reconsidered. Now, as she drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Site 7, a decommissioned nuclear facility hidden in the Appalachian Mountains, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher from small-town Nebraska, Sarah had enlisted at 18. driven by a need to prove herself that she'd never quite been able to explain. Her father had tried to talk her out of it. "Sarah, honey, the military, it's not kind to women. You're smart. You could go to college, become anything." But Sarah had wanted something more than kindness. She'd wanted to test herself against the impossible. The gates of Site 7 loomed out of the darkness, all concrete and razor wire. Sarah presented her credentials to the stone-faced guards, who examined them with excessive scrutiny before waving her through action. The facility sprawled before her a maze of bunkers, training grounds, and obstacles that looked more like torture devices than exercise equipment. She parked and grabbed her gear, noting the dozens of other vehicles already there. As she walked toward the registration building, she heard voices, male voices, laughing and boasting. Through the window, she could see them, 24 of the military's elite, all men, all supremely confident in their abilities. Sarah pushed through the door, and the laughter died instantly. 24 pairs of eyes turned to her, expressions ranging from surprise to amusement to outright hostility. "Well, well," a voice drawled from the corner. Master Chief Jake Havoc Harrison, SEAL Team 6, unfolded himself from his chair. 6'4", built like a linebacker, with arms covered in intricate tattoos, looks like someone got lost on their way to the admin building. A ripple of chuckles ran through the room. Sarah set her bag down carefully, meeting Harrison's gaze. "Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, reporting for Ghost Protocol Selection." The chuckles turned to silence, then to whispers. Harrison's grin widened. "Mitchell, you're the diversity hire Steele was bitching about. This should be entertaining." "Can she even carry a full combat load?" someone muttered. $20 says she's out before lunch." Another voice added. Sarah had heard it all before. In Ranger School, in Sniper School, in every elite program she'd ever attended. The doubt, the dismissal, the barely veiled contempt. She'd learned long ago that words were just noise. Actions were what mattered. A door slammed open, and Colonel Steele strode in, flanked by 4 instructors who looked like they'd been carved from granite. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and his lip curled. "Gentlemen," he began, pointedly excluding her from the address. "Welcome to hell. For the next 7 days, you will be pushed beyond your physical, mental, and emotional limits. You will be hungry, tired, cold, and miserable. You will want to quit. Most of you will." He began pacing, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. The Ghost Protocol is not about strength or speed or marksmanship. It's about adaptability. It's about thinking when your brain is screaming for oxygen. It's about finding solutions when there are none. It's about becoming something more than human. His eyes locked on Sarah again. "Some of you don't belong here. Some of you will realize that very quickly. There is no shame in ringing out." He gestured to a brass bell mounted on the wall. "That bell is your escape. Ring it 3 times, and your suffering ends." One of the instructors, a wiry man with dead eyes, stepped forward. "Strip down to PT gear. You have 60 seconds. Move." The room exploded into motion. Sarah changed efficiently, ignoring the stares and whispers. When they were assembled outside, shivering in the pre-dawn cold, Steel Smileda, Predator's smile. First evolution. 10-mile run. Full combat load. You have 90 minutes. Fail to make time. You're out. Fall behind. You're out. Quit. You're out. He checked his watch. Go. They ran. Through woods. Over hills. Across streams. Sarah settled into a steady pace, her breathing controlled, our mind quiet. She'd learned in Afghanistan that the body could do incredible things when the mind got out of the way. By mile 5, the group had spread out. The faster runners Harrison and a few Ranger Shad pulled ahead. Sarah maintained her position in the middle of the pack, focusing on efficiency rather than speed. Her shoulders burned under the weight of the ruck, but she'd carried heavier loads through mountain passes under fire. Behind her, she heard someone stumble and curse. A Special Forces operator she recognized from Fort Campbell was struggling, his face red, breath coming in gasps. As she passed him, he shot her a look of pure hatred. By mile 8, that operator was gone. 2 others had also fallen back, unable to maintain the pace. Sarah's legs felt like lead, but she pressed on. The trail turned upward, a brutal ascent that had several men slowing to a walk. Sarah didn't slow. She'd learned in the mountains of Afghanistan that momentum was everything. Stop moving. And the body started shutting down. She passed 2 more men, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. They finished at the parade ground, where Steele waited with a stopwatch. Harrison came in first, barely winded. Sarah finished 7th, her time well under the limit. As the stragglers stumbled in, she did the math. 3 men had already quit or failed to make time. Pathetic, Steele announced. 21 left, and we haven't even started. Hydrate. You have 5 minutes before the next evolution. The next evolution was worse. An obstacle course that seemed designed by a sadist, walls to climb, ropes to traverse, tunnels to crawl through, all while being sprayed with fire hoses and pelted with rubber bullets. Sarah's world narrowed to the next obstacle, the next breath, the next step. Halfway through, crawling through a mud-filled tunnel with barely enough room to breathe, she heard someone ahead of her start to panic. Sergeant Collins, Air Force Pararescue, had stopped moving, his breathing rapid and shallow. Can't breathe. Too tight. Sarah could hear the instructors yelling for him to move, threatening failure. Collins wasn't moving. In moments, he'd either quit or pass out, and anyone behind him would fail the time limit. Collins, Sarah said, her voice calm despite the mud filling her mouth. What's your daughter's name? What? His voice was high, panicked. Your daughter. You mentioned her at breakfast. What's her name? Emma. Her name's Emma. How old is Emma? 6. She's 6. Tell me about her birthday party. The one you missed because of deployment. As Collins talked, his breathing slowed. He started moving again, inch by inch. Focusing on his daughter instead of the crushing weight of earth above them, they emerged, gasping and filthy. But within the time limit, Collins looked at her, mud-caked and exhausted. Thanks, he managed. Sarah just nodded and moved to the next obstacle. By noon, they were down to 18. The bell had rung 5 times entreat, each chime a surrender. Those who remained looked haggard, their earlier bravado replaced by grim determination. Harrison still led the pack, but his swagger had diminished. Even he was feeling the strain. Lunch was a cruel joke, cold MREs to be eaten while doing flutter kicks. Anyone who stopped kicking didn't eat. Sarah mechanically chewed the tasteless food, her abs screaming, watching 2 more men give up and ring the bell. 16. Steele announced with satisfaction. Still too many. The afternoon brought weapons drills. Not just shooting that would have been too easy. They had to assemble various weapons blindfolded, clear complex malfunctions under time pressure, all after being spun until dizzy and disoriented. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency. She'd learned to strip and reassemble her rifle in complete darkness in Afghanistan. When night operations meant any light could be fatal, the muscle memory was there, encoded in her bones. She was one of only 4 to pass that evolution on the first try. Harrison failed twice before succeeding. His look of frustration was almost worth the burning in her muscles. As the sun set on the first day, they were down to 14. Steele gathered them in a circle, his expression unreadable. Congratulations, he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. You've survived day 1. The easy day, several men groaned. Tonight, you'll have the luxury of 4 hours sleep. You'll need it. Tomorrow, we begin stress inoculation. Those of you who think you've experienced stress in combat haven't seen anything yet. They were assigned to barracks communal. Of course, Sarah took a bunk in the corner, ignoring the uncomfortable silence her presence created. As she unlaced her boots, Harrison approached, That was smart, he said quietly. What you did for Collins. Sarah looked up, surprised by the lack of hostility in his voice. We're only as strong as our weakest link. That's not how the teams usually work. It's every man for himself in selection. Maybe that's why no one's completed the final exercise in 3 years. Harrison considered this, then walked away without another word. Sarah lay down, every muscle screaming. Day 1 was over. 6 more to go. As exhaustion pulled her under, she thought about her father. About his warning that the military wasn't kind to women. He was right. Of course. But Sarah hadn't joined looking for kindness. She joined looking for transformation. The second day began with chaos. Sarah woke not to an alarm, but to the deafening sound of flashbang grenades and screaming instructors. Disoriented, she rolled out of her bunk just as the lights cut out, plunging the barracks into darkness. Gas, gas, gas. The acrid smell of CS gas filled the air. Sarah fumbled for her gas mask, muscle memory guiding her hands in the darkness. Around her, she heard coughing, cursing, the crash of someone falling over equipment. She sealed her mask and moved toward what she thought was the door, only to find it blocked. Find another way out, an instructor screamed. You have 2 minutes before the building burns. Smoke now mixed with the gas. Sarah dropped low. Feeling along the wall, her hand found a window locked. She grabbed her rifle and smashed the butt against the glass. Nothing. Reinforced. Think. Adapt. Overcome. She felt along the window frame, found the hinges. Pulling her multi-tool, she worked at the pins. Precious seconds ticking by. Around her, others were panicking, their judgment clouded by gas and fear. The pins came free. Sarah shoved the window out and dove through, landing hard on the gravel outside. She ripped off her mask, gasping in clean air, and saw she was the third one out. Harrison had found another window. A Delta operator named Cruz had apparently kicked through a wall panel. By the time the 2 minutes expired, only 9 had made it out. The others emerged moments later, guided by instructors, to find their gear already packed by the bell. If you can't think under pressure, Steele announced, you're useless to us. Ring out now and save us all time. 3 more bells. They were down to 11. The day's evolution was urban warfare, but not the kind they'd trained for. They were trucked to a mock city, a maze of buildings and alleyways that looked disturbingly real. Their mission: retrieve intelligence from a building at the center while avoiding capture by opposing forces. Oh, and one more thing, Steele added with his predator's smile. The opposition knows exactly where you are at all times. They have thermal imaging, motion sensors, and aerial surveillance. You have, he gestured at their basic gear, whatever you can find or create. Begin. Sarah's team consisted of herself, Harrison, and a Green Beret named Thompson. They huddled in an alley, studying the urban maze before them. This is impossible, Thompson muttered. How do we avoid thermal imaging? We don't, Harrison said. We push through fast. Overwhelming force. Sarah shook her head. That's what they expect. Special operations warriors relying on aggression. She studied the buildings. Noticed something. The sewers. What? Look at the maintenance covers. This place has a sewer system. Thermal imaging doesn't work through concrete and water. Harrison grimaced. You want us to crawl through sewers? I want us to complete the mission. 20 minutes later, they were wading through knee-deep water in pitch darkness. Guided only by Sarah's compass and pace count, the stench was overwhelming. But it was nothing compared to the sewage ditches she'd hidden in outside Kandahar. They emerged 2 blocks from the target building, covered in filth but undetected. The intelligence was retrieved without firing a shot. As they exfiltrated, they could hear other teams being ambushed. The sound of simulated gunfire and shouting, echoing through the streets. Their success earned them no praise from Steele, only a grudging nod. But Sarah noticed something shift in how Harrison and Thompson looked at her. Not acceptance. Not yet, but a recognition that she might actually belong here. The third day brought psychological warfare. Sleep deprivation combined with interrogation resistance training, Sarah found herself in a concrete cell, strobe lights flashing, death metal blasting at volumes that made her teeth ache. The instructors knew their business. They'd read her file, knew her history. "Sergeant Mitchell," a voice said over the speakers. "Tell us about Kandahar. Tell us about the men who died because you were too weak to save them." Sarah remained silent, focusing on her breathing. She'd been through worse interrogations, by men who meant her actual harm. This was theater. Painful theater. But theater nonetheless. Rodriguez died, calling for his mother. "Did you know that? 22 years old? Crying for mama while you hid like a coward." Her jaw clenched. Rodriguez had died instantly from the IED blast. She'd held his body, yes, but he'd never suffered. They were lying, trying to break her. "Your father was right, wasn't he? You should have stayed home, gotten married, had babies. Instead, you got good men killed playing soldier." For 6 hours it continued. The lights, the noise, the accusations. They brought in actors dressed as Taliban fighters. They showed her fake photos of tortured comrades. They tried every psychological trick in the book. Sarah gave them nothing. When they finally released her, she stumbled out to find only 7 candidates remaining. 4 had broken during interrogation, revealing operational secrets, failing the exercise. Harrison was there, looking haggard. Cruz too. The others, she didn't recognize. They'd been in different teams. Day 3 complete. Steele announced, "Tomorrow, we test your limits." Sarah almost laughed. If this wasn't their limits, what was? She found out the next morning. The evolution was simple in concept, brutal in execution. They were given coordinates 30 miles away. They had to reach them in 8 hours. On foot, carrying a wounded teammate. "Oh," Steele added, "and you'll be hunted. The instructors will be in vehicles, trying to capture you. Get caught. You fail. Don't make the time. You fail. Drop your teammate. You fail." They drew lots for teams and roles. Fate paired Sarah with Harrison, and fate made her the wounded one. Her heart sank. Harrison was strong, but carrying her for 30 miles, while being hunted, Harrison looked at her, his expression unreadable. "How much do you weigh?" 135. He calculated. Plus here. Shit. He looked at the map, then at her. "You trust me?" Strange question from someone who'd dismissed her 4 days ago. "Do I have a choice?" There's always a choice. You could ring out. Sarah met his gaze. "Not happening." "Then yeah. You need to trust me." What followed was 8 hours of hell. Harrison didn't just carry her, he innovated. He fashioned a travois from branches and paracord for flat ground. He modified his ruck to distribute her weight better for rough terrain. When they heard vehicles approaching, he would hide them both in whatever cover he could find, once in a drainage pipe so small they barely fit, another time buried under leaves and dirt. But it was the conversations during the endless miles that surprised Sarah most. "Why are you here?" Harrison asked during hour 3, sweat pouring down his face as he dragged the travois up a hill. Real answer. Not the bullshit we tell boards. Sarah considered lying, then decided he'd earned honesty. "Because I'm tired of being told what I can't do. Because every time I succeed, someone finds a reason why it doesn't count. Too small, too female, too lucky." She paused. "Because maybe if I do something impossible enough, I'll finally believe it myself." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "My daughter's 8, he finally said. "Wants to be a SEAL like Daddy. I keep telling her girls can't be SEALs." He adjusted his grip on the travois. "Maybe I'm wrong." They made the coordinates with 12 minutes to spare. Only 4 candidates total succeeded. 3 had been caught. 1 team had quit when the wounded member decided 30 miles was too far. Day 5 was water operations, Sarah's strongest skill set. It turned out, growing up in Nebraska, she'd spent summers at her grandparents' lake house, swimming until her lungs burned. The underwater knot tying, the breath-holding exercises, the swimming and full Garrett all came back. She was the only one to complete the underwater navigation course on the first try. Finding all 5 submerged markers while breathing through a narrow tube that barely provided enough air, Cruz nearly drowned, attempting it. Another candidate, a Marine raider, rang out rather than try again. Down to 5. Day 6 brought what Steele called creative problem solving. They were given scenarios that seemed impossible: scale a 40-foot smooth wall with no equipment, cross a raging river with a wounded team, disable a complex bomb with missing components. It was here that Sarah's different perspective became an asset. While the men defaulted to force and conventional tactics, she saw alternatives. The wall couldn't be climbed, but it could be undermined. She found a drainage grate that led to the other side. The river crossing failed for everyone until she suggested using their uniforms to create flotation devices, something she'd learned from an Afghan woman who'd helped her escape pursuit. For the bomb, while others tried to bypass the missing components, Sarah recognized the device itself was a decoy. The real bomb was hidden underneath, a detail the instructors hadn't expected anyone to catch. By evening, they were down to 4: Sarah, Harrison, Cruz, and a quiet Delta operator named Reynolds, who'd said maybe 50 words the entire week. Steele gathered them as the sun set. "Congratulations. You 4 have made it to the final exercise. Ghost Protocol itself." His smile was sharp. 72 hours. One objective. No rules except succeed or fail. He handed them each an envelope. "Your mission parameters. You have 1 hour to plan. The exercise begins at full dark." Sarah opened her envelope. Read the contents. And felt her blood run cold. It wasn't just difficult. It was impossible. Genuinely. Legitimately impossible. Infiltrate a fortified compound 20 miles away. Retrieve a high-value package. Exfiltrate to a landing zone 50 miles in the opposite direction. All while being hunted by a full company of Rangers playing opposing forces, and they had to do it as a team. All 4 succeed. Or all 4 fail. The planning hour was tense. Cruz wanted a direct assault on the compound. Reynolds favored stealth. Harrison suggested splitting up. They couldn't agree on anything. "We're thinking about this wrong." Sarah finally said, "Look at the parameters again. What's missing?" They studied the documents. Reynolds saw it first. "No time limit." "Exactly. They expect us to rush. To push hard for 72 hours. But what if we don't? What if we take our time? Let them get tired. Complacent. That's not how we're trained," Cruz said, "which is why no one succeeded in 3 years. It took precious minutes to convince them, but eventually they agreed. They would move slowly, carefully. They would use the full 72 hours. They would think, not just act." The first night, they covered only 5 miles, moving with excruciating care. Twice, Ranger patrols passed within feet of their position. Each time, they remained motionless, controlling even their breathing. Sarah's experience in Afghanistan served them well. She knew how to disappear, how to become part of the landscape. By dawn, the Rangers were frustrated. Radio chatter suggested they expected to have made contact by now. The candidates used this to their advantage, hiding in plain sight in an equipment yard, while patrols searched the wilderness. The second night, they reached the compound. It was a fortress: guard towers, roving patrols, motion sensors. The works. A direct assault would be suicide. Stealth seemed impossible. "We need a distraction," Harrison said. "No," Sarah countered. "We need them to not be here at all." She outlined her plan. It was insane. It relied on psychology rather than tactics. But after an hour of debate, they couldn't come up with anything better. At 0300, Reynolds used the sat phone they'd been given for emergencies, but he didn't call for extraction. He called the Ranger Company commander, claiming to be Steele, ordering an immediate relocation to deal with a real-world emergency 30 miles away. It shouldn't have worked. But Reynolds had studied Steele's speech patterns for a week. The exhausted Ranger commander, eager for action after 2 nights of futile searching. Didn't question orders that seemed to come from the exercise controller. Within an hour, the compound was nearly empty. A skeleton cref remained. Easily avoided, they retrieved the Pachygia 100-pound dummy they now had to carry 50 miles. The exfiltration was the hardest part. The Rangers, realizing they'd been deceived, were furious. They flooded back, setting up checkpoints, using helicopters, dogs, every asset at their disposal. For 36 hours, the 4 candidates moved like ghosts. They hid in caves during the day. They waded through streams to break scent trails. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, they talked about families, fears, dreams. The shared misery bonded them in ways Sarah hadn't expected. Harrison carried more than his share of the dummy's weight. Cruz shared his last water when Sarah's ran out. Reynolds, the quiet one, revealed a wicked sense of humor that kept spirits up during the darkest moments. On the final morning, 5 miles from the extraction point, disaster struck. A ranger patrol appeared from nowhere, cutting off their route. They were exhausted, out of options. This was where every previous team had failed. Pushed to contact, captured in a final fight. "I have an idea," Sarah said, "but you're not going to like it." She was right. They didn't like it, but they did it anyway. 20 minutes later, the Rangers found them. All 4 candidates were standing in the open, hands raised, surrendering. The Rangers approached cautiously, suspecting a trick. "Exercise is over," the Ranger lieutenant said, unable to hide his satisfaction. "You're captured." Sarah smiled. "Are we?" That's when the lieutenant noticed what they were standing next to. The landing zone marker. They'd reached the extraction point before allowing themselves to be captured. The lieutenant's radio crackled. Steele's voice, genuinely furious. "Stand down. Exercice complete." They succeeded. It was a technicality, a loophole in the rules. They'd completed the mission, infiltrated, retrieved the package, reached the extraction point. Getting captured after completing the objective wasn't failure. It was just unconventional. The helicopter ride back to Site 7 was silent. Sarah couldn't read Steele's expression. The other instructors looked stunned. No one had completed Ghost Protocol in 3 years. Now, not just one but all 4 candidates had succeeded. They landed to find General Hayes waiting, a small smile on her face. "Congratulations," she said simply. "You've done what others said was impossible." Steele stepped forward, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a long moment, he stared at Sarah. Then, surprising everyone, he extended his hand. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "You didn't just complete the course. You changed it, made us rethink everything." He paused. "The Ghost Protocol needs people who see differently. Welcome to the program." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Around here, Harrison, Cruz, and Reynolds were grinning, exhausted but triumphant. They'd done it together. The woman who'd been rejected, dismissed, doubted she'd not only proven herself but elevated everyone around her. Later, as they received their certificates, Harrison pulled Sarah aside. "That thing you said, about finally believing it yourself if you did something impossible enough." He paused. "Do you believe it now?" Sarah considered the question. A week ago, she'd walked into Site 7 carrying years of doubt, years of having to prove herself over and over. Now, she felt different. Not because she'd proven something to Steele or the others, but because she'd proven something to herself. "Yeah," she said finally. "I do." "Good." Harrison smiled. "Because I've got a daughter who needs to meet you. She's got this crazy idea about becoming a SEAL. Maybe you can tell her anything's possible." As they walked back to the barracks, Sarah thought about her father. He'd been right, the military wasn't kind to women, but he'd been wrong about something else. She hadn't joined looking for kindness. She'd joined looking for transformation. And in the crucible of the Ghost Protocol, she'd found it. The aftermath was swift and significant. Within hours, Word had spread through the Special Operations community. The Ghost Protocol, the unbeatable course, had been conquered, not by some superhuman warrior, but by a team led by the woman everyone had dismissed. Requests poured in for Sarah to speak at other selection courses, to consult on training protocols, but she turned them all down. She had work to do. The Ghost Protocol isn't about creating perfect soldiers, she told General Hayes during her outbrief. It's about creating adaptive thinkers. People who can see beyond conventional solutions. What do you propose? Change the selection criteria. Stop looking for the physically strongest, and start looking for the mentally flexible. Diversity isn't a quotates, a tactical advantage. Hayes nodded slowly. Colonel Steele has requested you join the instructor cadre. Help redesign the program. Sarah was surprised. He has? He's many things. But he's not stupid. He recognizes innovation when he sees it. Hayes posed. Interested? Sarah thought about it. Going from rejected candidate to instructor in a week, it had a certain poetry to it. On one condition, she said. The next class includes at least 5 women. I think that can be arranged. 6 months later, Sarah stood where Steele once had, watching a new batch of candidates arrive. Among them, 3 women, eyes hard with determination. She recognized the look, the need to prove themselves, to overcome doubts both internal and external. Harrison stood beside her. Now a fellow instructor. Think any of them will make it? Sarah smiled. I think they'll surprise us. The best ones always do. As the candidates filed in, Sarah caught the eye of one of the women, a young Force Recon Marine who reminded her of herself. The Marine's chin lifted slightly. A silent challenge. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement. Welcome to hell. Sarah began, consciously including everyone. For the next 7 days, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will want to quit. Most of you will. She paused. Let her words sink in. But for those who endure, who adapt, who think beyond what you've been taught, you'll discover capabilities you never knew you had. You'll transform. She thought of her own journey. From the frightened but determined 18-year-old who'd enlisted against her father's wishes to the woman standing here now. Every doubt, every dismissal, every moment of having to prove herself, it had all led to this. The Ghost Protocol doesn't care about your size, your gender, or your background, she continued. It only cares about one thing. Can you evolve? Can you see solutions where others see obstacles? Can you turn weakness into strength? In the back, she saw Steele watching, arms crossed. He caught her eye and gave the slightest nod. The man who'd tried to keep her out had become one of her strongest supporters, though he'd never admit it publicly. One more thing, Sarah added, departing from the traditional script. Some of you were told you don't belong here, that your diversity hires, quota fills, or political correctness gone mad. She let her gaze sweep the room, lingering on the women. Prove them wrong. But, more importantly, prove yourself right. As the candidates were led to their first evolution, Harrison chuckled. You're going soft. Mitchell, that was almost inspirational. Just wait until tonight's stress inoculation. I've made some improvements. Harrison's face paled. Improvements? Let's just say the sewer system now includes some interesting obstacles. You're evil. I learned from the best. They watched the candidates disappear into the woods for their first run. In 6 months, the Ghost Protocol had evolved dramatically under Sarah's influence. The physical standards remained brutal, but the mental challenges had become more complex, more creative. The success rate had actually increased, not because it was easier, but because they were selecting for different qualities. As Sarah headed to the control room to monitor the evolution, her phone buzzed. A message from her father. Saw the news article about the Ghost Protocol. Still think the military isn't kind to women. But maybe my daughter is changing that. Proud of you. She smiled, pocketing the phone. He was right. In a way, she was changing things. Not through kindness, but through competence. Not by lowering standards, but by expanding what those standards measured. The radio crackled. Mitchell, we've got our first bell ringer. Ranger candidate. Couldn't handle the pace. Copy that, Sarah responded. Send him out with dignity. Attempting this takes courage. That was another change she'd implemented. No more humiliation for those who quit. Attempting the impossible deserved respect, even in failure. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about transformation, not just her own, but the program's, the military's, society's. Change was slow, often painful, always resisted. But it was also inevitable when the right pressure was applied in the right way. By sunset, 3 more had rung out. The women were all still in, she noted with satisfaction. Not because they were women, but because they'd been selected for qualities beyond raw physical strength: adaptability, creativity, resilience of spirit rather than just body. How many do you think will make it to the final exercise? Harrison asked as they reviewed the day's footage. More than last time, Sarah predicted. We're not just testing them anymore. We're teaching them to think differently, and if they all fail, Sarah shrugged, then we learn from it and adjust. That's what adaptation means. As night fell over Site 7, Sarah made her rounds. Observing the candidates struggling through their evolutions, she paused at one station where the young Force Recon Marine was attempting to solve a complex puzzle while exhausted and under fire. The woman's hands were steady despite the chaos, her mind clearly working through the problem systematically. Time, the instructor called. The Marine had failed, missing one crucial element. Sarah stepped forward. Run it again. The instructor looked surprised. Ma'am? Run it again. But this time, Sarah addressed the Marine. Tell me what you're thinking. Walk me through your process. The Marine, breathing hard, nodded as she worked through the puzzle again, narrating her thought process. Sarah saw the exact moment the realization hit. The Marine's eyes widened, and she quickly adjusted her approach, solving the puzzle with seconds to spare. Excellent, Sarah said. Remember, in the field, your greatest asset isn't your strength or speed. It's your ability to adapt your thinking in real time. The Marine nodded, a spark of understanding in her eyes. Yes, ma'am. As Sarah walked away, Harrison fell into step beside her. You're creating monsters. You know, thinking soldiers who question everything. Good. The world's changing too fast for robots who follow orders blindly. They reached the control room where Steele was reviewing footage from the urban warfare exercise. He looked up as they entered. Your protégé is doing well, he said, nodding toward a screen showing the Marine navigating the sewer exactly as Sarah had done months ago. She's not my protégé, Sarah corrected. She's her own person, finding her own way. Steele grunted, but she caught what might have been approval in his expression. The brass wants a report on our changes. They're considering implementing similar modifications across other special operations selection programs. What will you tell them? The truth, that a woman I tried to keep out revolutionized our entire approach. That diversity of thought is as important as diversity of appearance. That the future of warfare requires warriors who think, not just fight. Sarah was speechless. This from the man who'd fought her presence so bitterly. Steele seemed to read her thoughts. I'm a dinosaur, Mitchell, but I'm not extinct. I can recognize evolution when I see it. He paused. My daughter wants to join the Marines. She's 15. Stubborn as hell. Reminds me of someone. The implied compliment hung in the air. Sarah simply nodded, understanding, passing between them. As the night wore on and the candidates pushed through their trials, Sarah reflected on the journey, from rejection to revolution, from outsider to architect of change. The Ghost Protocol had transformed her, but perhaps more importantly, she had transformed it. The bell rang twice more before dawn. 18 candidates remained, including all 3 women. It was the highest retention rate for day 1 in the program's history. You've ruined everything, Harrison said with mock despair as they headed for morning briefing. Now I actually have to think about my lesson plans instead of just making them do push-ups until they quit. Adapt or die. Havoc. Isn't that what you SEALs say? I hate it when you use my own words against me. They entered the briefing room where the exhausted candidates waited. Sarah studied their faces, tired, but not broken. Challenged but not defeated. This was what right looked like. "Congratulations on surviving day 1. She began. "The easy day." Groans echoed through the room, just as they had during her own selection. "Today, we begin stress inoculation. But remember, stress is just another environment, and humans are the most adaptable species on the planet. Show me that adaptation." As the candidates filed out for their next evolution, the young Marine lingered. "Ma'am, thank you for the second chance last night. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn from failure." Sarah replied, "That's not weakness, that's growth." The Marine nodded and hurried after her classmates. Sarah watched her go, seeing shadows of her younger, self-determined, doubted, driven to prove something. "Think she'll make it?" Steele asked, appearing at her shoulder. "I think she'll surprise herself," Sarah answered. "The best ones always do." The Ghost Protocol continued, relentless and unforgiving, but something had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just about breaking people down, it was about building them back up stronger, smarter, more adaptable. On the final day, as the remaining candidates prepared for the 72-hour exercise, Sarah gathered them one last time. "What you're about to attempt has been called impossible," she said. "For 3 years. That was true. Then 4 people proved it wasn't impossible, just that we were thinking about it wrong." She met each of their eyes. "Don't try to beat the exercise. Redefine it. Don't just survive. Evolve." As they departed for their final test, Sarah felt a sense of completion. She'd come here to prove herself. But she'd done something more. She'd opened a door that could never be closed again. Her phone buzzed. A message from General Hayes. "Joint Chiefs want to meet with you." Apparently, revolutionizing one impossible program wasn't enough. They have others that need your touch. Sarah smiled. The girl from Nebraska who just wanted to test herself against the impossible had found her calling, making the impossible possible, one transformation at a time. Behind her, the bell sat silent, not because the course had gotten easier, but because the candidates had gotten smarter. They'd learned what Sarah had always known, that strength came in many forms, that adaptation trumped raw power, that the greatest victories often came from seeing what others missed. The Ghost Protocol would continue to evolve, to challenge, to transform those brave enough to attempt it, but it would never again be a place where someone was rejected simply for being different. Different was exactly what made them stronger. As the sun set over Site 7, Sarah stood where she'd first arrived. Scared, but determined. Doubted, but unbroken. She'd been rejected, dismissed, underestimated, but she'd also been exactly what the program needed: someone who could see beyond the limitations of conventional thinking. The female veteran who'd been told she didn't belong had not only completed the impossible but had redefined what possible meant, and in doing so, she'd opened the door for others to follow. To exceed. To transform. The Ghost Protocol had tried to break her. Instead, she'd remade it in a new imagone, where strength was measured not just in muscle but in mind, where diversity was a tactical advantage, where evolution was the only way to survive. And this was only the beginning.